3,000 lives. That's the chip Washington just pushed across the table in a game where Iran holds the terrain, the proximity, and the will to bleed this out for years. I'm Kane Shimatsuka, and what I'm about to show you isn't speculation. It's arithmetic. The kind of arithmetic that makes Pentagon planners sweat in classified briefings but smile for cable news cameras. March 24th, according to multiple defense sources, the 82nd Airborne Division received deployment orders to the Persian Gulf. Enhanced operational flexibility, they called it. That phrase should terrify you because I've studied enough military doctrine to know what it actually means. It means someone is planning to seize ground, and when you're sending paratroopers designed for airfield seizure into a theater where Iran fields 580,000 troops on their own soil, you're not planning a show of force, you're setting a trap for your own people. Let me walk you through the math that nobody at the Pentagon briefing wanted to discuss. But first, pause and ask yourself this. If America's most elite rapid deployment unit is being sent to a region where the mission is supposedly accomplished, why do they need reinforcements at all? Hold that question. The answer reveals everything about what's actually happening in the Gulf right now. The 82nd Airborne isn't a garrison unit. You don't deploy them to sit in air-conditioned hangars monitoring satellite feeds. Their entire operational doctrine centers on one capability: forceful entry, parachute assault, airfield seizure, secure a perimeter under fire until heavier forces arrive. That's what they trained for at Fort Liberty. That's what they've executed in every major conflict since World War II. So when the Pentagon pairs the phrase enhanced flexibility with a unit specifically designed to jump behind enemy lines and take territory, the operational intent becomes transparent. Someone is planning a ground operation. The target, according to strategic assessments I've reviewed from multiple intelligence circles, is almost certainly Kharg Island. It's a 15 square kilometer piece of Iranian territory sitting 25 kilometers off the southern coast, handling roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports. The strategic logic is seductive. Seize the island, choke Iran's revenue, use it as leverage to force the Strait of Hormuz back open, force Tehran to the negotiating table from a position of economic strangulation. On a briefing slide in the Pentagon, this probably looks like a masterstroke. In reality, it's a hostage situation waiting to happen. Here's why. Kharg Island sits within artillery range of the Iranian mainland. Every anti-ship missile system Iran has positioned along that coast over the past 40 years was placed there specifically for this scenario. The Noor, the Qadr, the Khalij Fars. These aren't defensive systems. They're area denial weapons designed to turn the northern Persian Gulf into a kill zone for any naval force attempting exactly what the Marines on the USS Boxer and USS Tripoli are being positioned to execute. Now layer in the force ratio. America has roughly 8,000 combat troops in theater right now. Iran has 580,000 active personnel on their home ground, with supply lines measured in kilometers instead of oceans, fighting on terrain they've mapped down to the meter, using tunnel networks built over decades specifically to survive American air superiority. I've watched this pattern before in strategic assessments. The global firepower comparison looks decisive. America ranks first with a power index of 0.0699. Iran ranks 16th at 0.2269. But those are aggregate numbers. Those numbers include America's commitments to NATO, to the Pacific, to Korea, to 750 bases spread across 80 countries. The force actually available in the Gulf? 8,000 troops facing more than 500,000 defenders who watched American strikes kill their supreme leader exactly 4 weeks ago. The math doesn't work. But here's where it gets worse. And this is the part that keeps me up at night analyzing worst-case scenarios. This deployment isn't designed to win. It's designed to justify the next deployment. 3,000 paratroopers become the forward element that necessitates 10,000 for force protection. 10,000 becomes the logistical footprint requiring 30,000. 30,000 pulls assets from Europe and the Pacific, creating vulnerabilities in theaters where China is watching every interceptor America expends in the Gulf, knowing those are interceptors that won't be available in the South China Sea. This is how escalation works in modern conflict, not in one dramatic announcement, in increments, each one described as operational necessity, each one made inevitable by the commitment that preceded it. And I want you to understand something critical about the timeline here, because timing reveals intent. March 24th, deployment orders issued. March 25th, Iran struck U.S. positions in the Gulf again. Defense Secretary Hegseth's response? We negotiate with bombs. Not diplomacy backed by force. Bombs as the negotiation. That's not the language of a government seeking de-escalation. That's the language of a government performing diplomacy for domestic consumption while prosecuting an entirely different strategy on the ground. President Trump himself characterized the elimination of Iran's supreme leader as an accomplished mission. Mission accomplished. Those two words should trigger historical alarms for anyone who remembers how the last Middle Eastern occupation began. If the mission is accomplished, why are 3,000 additional paratroopers packing their gear right now? The answer is that the accomplished mission created the conditions requiring the next mission. And that next mission will create conditions requiring the one after that. It's a self-generating cycle, and the math at every stage points in one direction. Let me show you the historical parallel, because this isn't theoretical. The last time America occupied a country of comparable strategic complexity in this region was Iraq. Iraq has 1/3 of Iran's population. Iraq has none of Iran's mountainous terrain. Iraq's military had been degraded by a decade of sanctions and no-fly zones before the invasion even began. That occupation required 170,000 troops at peak deployment. It cost $2 trillion in direct expenditures according to conservative estimates. It produced 4,500 American casualties. And after 8 years, it still didn't generate a stable outcome. Iran is 3.5 times the size of Iraq geographically. Its population is more than double. Its terrain is dramatically more defensible, with mountain ranges on 3 sides providing natural fortification that Iraq's flat desert never offered. And critically, Iran's military has spent the past 20 years studying exactly how America fought in Iraq, specifically to ensure the same operational playbook fails when applied to Iranian territory. American air superiority is real. American intelligence capability is unmatched. The $895 billion defense budget is genuine. None of that is in dispute. But air power doesn't hold territory. Satellites don't clear tunnel networks. F-22s don't reopen shipping lanes when the adversary has already mined the waterway and possesses the will to remine it every night. Iran's $15.5 billion annual military budget looks microscopic compared to America's. But Iran isn't projecting power across 80 countries simultaneously. Every dollar of that budget is concentrated in one theater, their own, defending terrain they control. With interior lines of supply and communication, against an expeditionary force operating at the end of a logistics chain that runs through a strait, Iran has already demonstrated the capability to contest. The deployment currently in motion is not sized for victory, it's sized for presence. And presence in an active combat zone, where the adversary is striking your forward operating bases 3 times per week, isn't a strategy, it's a tripwire that guarantees the next escalation. I need you to understand what I'm actually saying here, because this isn't about capability or courage. The 82nd Airborne is one of the finest military formations any nation has ever produced. The Marines staged on those amphibious assault ships are among the most capable expeditionary fighters on Earth. Every one of those 3,000 paratroopers will execute whatever mission they're given with a level of professionalism and tactical excellence that most people will never fully comprehend. That's not the question. The question is whether the mission they're being asked to execute was ever designed to succeed as stated, or whether it was designed to create the political and operational conditions that justify the deployments that follow. 3,000 troops cannot hold Kharg Island against Iran's full coastal defense capability if Tehran decides the island is worth the cost. 8,000 troops cannot reopen the Strait of Hormuz against a determined adversary with area denial weapons positioned specifically for that contingency. 30,000 troops cannot occupy Iran. 170,000 couldn't stabilize Iraq. The math at every stage of this escalation ladder points toward failure. But here's the trap within the trap. Once those paratroopers are on the ground, once the Marines have made their amphibious approach, once American lives are committed to a contested piece of Iranian territory 25 kilometers from the mainland, the political cost of withdrawal becomes prohibitive. It's no longer about whether the operation makes strategic sense. It's about not abandoning Americans under fire. That's the real trap. Not the tactical situation on Kharg Island, the political logic that makes retreat impossible once the commitment is made. And I believe, based on every pattern I've observed in how modern escalation unfolds, that this trap is a feature, not a bug. The deployment is designed to create the conditions that necessitate the next deployment. The mission isn't to win, the mission is to make winning appear necessary. So when you hear enhanced operational flexibility in a Pentagon briefing, translate it. When you hear force protection requirements, understand what's actually being described. When you hear accomplished mission followed immediately by reinforcement orders, recognize the contradiction for what it is. The math doesn't work. Not for 3,000 paratroopers on an island within artillery range of 580,000 defenders. Not for 8,000 troops in a theater where the adversary controls the choke point. Not for a country that spent 20 years and $2 trillion learning this exact lesson in a country 3 times easier than the one we're walking into now. I'm Kane Shimatsuka. The numbers are public, the force ratios are documented, the historical precedents are clear, and the trap is already set. The question is whether anyone with the authority to stop this is actually running the math before the body count starts running it for them. And while Washington debates operational flexibility, Beijing is watching every interceptor depleted, every commitment extended, every strategic reserve drawn down in the Gulf, because every resource America burns in Iran is a resource unavailable when the real test begins in the Pacific. The math isn't just failing in one theater, it's failing globally, and the clock is already running.